Hello, in this video I'll show you how to make a coffee-themed wood sign using pyrography. The wood sign that I'm using measures 8 inches by 6 inches. I measure it so that I can appropriately size the design in Cricut design space. I'm going to place the design vertically on the wood, so I make the horizontal distance 5 inches, so I'll have a ½ inch of clearance on each side. Then I attach all the design elements together and click Make It. I'll be cutting this out on 65-pound cardstock to use as a template. I make sure the material is selected correctly and then load the machine. Then I click Cut. Since this is a new design, I keep an eye while it's cutting to make sure everything's working right. Once the design is fully cut out, I remove it from the mat and trim it to a smaller size. Trimming the edges of the cardstock to be just outside the edges of the design will help me to measure center. I weed out any paper that's still sticking to the outer edge of the cardstock, but I'm careful to do this without bending the inner pieces because I will still need some of these inner pieces later to trace the insides of the design. Now that the design is fully weeded, I mark the center of the design. I mark the center both vertically and horizontally, and then extend the lines from center so I can use these lines to line up the drawing on the piece of wood later. Next, I find center on the piece of wood. I extend the center line only at the very edge of the wood, and then I'll use this to line up the extended lines on the piece of paper. Once I match the lines on the paper with the lines on the wood, I tape the paper into place. Now I use a pencil and trace inside of the cut cardstock. I'm using light pressure so that I won't have super dark pencil marks to cover, and I also prefer to trace pencil lines before I do any sanding. This way, if I do have some really dark lines, we can rub them out later. Then I reinsert some of the innermost pieces of cardstock that had been cut out and trace the inner lines from those. This will add the detailed light reflection on the spoon and also finish the design of the plate. Now I sand the entire surface of the wood. I start with 150 grit sandpaper. It's important to sand any wood surface before you burn it with a pyrography tool to make sure that you get a nice clean burn. Once all the burrs and rough edges are knocked off, I switch over to 320 grit sandpaper to make sure that I get a nice smooth finish. If you do accidentally sand away too many of the pencil lines, you can always go back in and darken them. I always keep a scrap piece of wood handy to test the heat of the pyrography tool and also to knock off any burnt wood that might build up on the tool. Now I've tested that the tool is hot enough to start burning, so I start working on the design. I'm using the universal tip, also called the chisel tip, for the pyrography tool. I do really enjoy using this tip because the different angles that you hold the tool changes the different burn patterns that you'll get on your wood. If I hold the tool straight up and down, then I get the nice straight edge of the tool applied to the wood. If I angle it to the side, then it shades in the wood. I have my heat set to the third highest setting out of the 4 settings. My plan for burning this design is to fill in everything that should be dark first, and then later come back and apply shading. When I apply the shading, I'm going to think about where the light source is coming from and where I should have shadows. I want the light source to be in line with the 2 hearts, so the lightest part of the cup and the lightest part of the coffee will be between the 2 hearts. I fill in all the dark lines and edges first to make sure that I can get the right contrast between light and dark. You also might notice that I haven't drawn in the coffee beans yet. The coffee beans should be the forwardmost layer, so I want to make sure that I have the shading behind the coffee beans right first. Once I have this fully shaded in, then I'll go back and add in some coffee beans. Finally, you'll notice that towards the end of shading, I do end up completing the circle for the coffee mug. I just wasn't liking the way that that empty space looked and thought it looked much better after I had filled it in. The last thing that I want to add about this design is that when burning wood, you can always go back and make the wood darker, but it's very hard to remove overburned wood. You can sand away some of the burned wood, but this only works to a certain extent. Because of this, I burn all the lines and edges once, fully expecting that I'll need to come back over these lines again later. Now I'm going to show the full process of burning this design sped up at 4 times speed. I find this really relaxing and hope you enjoy it too. Thanks for watching this video on how to make a coffee-themed wood sign using pyrography. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and as always, like and subscribe to see more content.